I think you heard me the first time. Clear out your locker. I want your badge on my desk in 10 minutes. You are fired.
The lobby of Diamond and Grace Jewelry Boutique had never been so quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind that happens when everyone in the room holds their breath at exactly the same time. The kind of silence that means someone is about to get humiliated. Kayla Brown stood in the middle of that silence with her head held high and her hands clenched so tightly at her sides that her knuckles ached. Around her, a circle of colleagues watched with wide eyes and poorly hidden smiles. A few customers at the display cases had stopped pretending to look at necklaces. They were watching, too. And standing right in front of Kayla, with his arms folded and his chin lifted like he'd just won something, was Michael Cole, regional manager, Jennifer's brother, and the single most insufferable man Kayla had ever had the misfortune of reporting to. "I think you heard me the first time," Michael said, loud enough for everyone to catch every single word. "Clear out your locker. I want your badge on my desk in 10 minutes. You're done here." Kayla didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. But inside, something that had been quietly cracking for months finally broke clean in half. Now, before the story gets to this moment, and trust me, by the time it gets back here, everything will make sense. There's something you need to know about Kayla Brown. Because Kayla didn't deserve this day. But she'd been living days like this for so long that she'd almost started to believe she did. Let's go back, not far, just a few hours, to the moment that started everything. Chicago in November has a specific kind of cold. It doesn't just touch you. It gets inside your coat, inside your bones, inside your mood. Kayla had been walking through that cold since 6 in the morning, wrapped in a pea coat that had seen better days and boots that were starting to separate at the left sole with a soft flapping sound every third step. Slap, slap, flap, slap, slap, flap. She'd been meaning to fix that for 3 weeks, but fixing boots cost money. And money, as of last Tuesday, was something Kayla Brown did not have in any meaningful quantity. She pushed through the back entrance of Diamond and Grace at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her shift started. She always came early. It never helped. But she came early anyway, because Kayla Brown was the kind of person who showed up, even when showing up hurt. Diamond and Grace was not a modest establishment. It sat on Michigan Avenue like it owned the street, which it basically did. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Marble floors so polished you could see your reflection looking confused back at you. Display cases lit with soft gold light that made every piece of jewelry inside look like it had been pulled directly from heaven's lost and found. The cheapest item in the store cost more than Kayla's monthly rent. She worked there as a sales associate, had worked there for 8 months. She was good at it too, genuinely good. She had a way of talking to customers that made them feel seen rather than sold to. She'd closed more high-value sales in her 8 months than most of the senior staff closed in a year. Not that anyone acknowledged that. "You're late," said a voice the moment Kayla stepped into the break room. Kayla looked at the clock on the wall. 8:48. "My shift starts at 9, Kayla said evenly. The woman who'd spoken, Daniela, senior associate, self-appointed queen of the break room, didn't even look up from her phone. "Michael wants everyone on the floor by 8:50. New directive." "When was that announced?" Kayla asked. "Yesterday." "I wasn't here yesterday. It was my day off." Daniela finally looked up, and her expression had exactly the kind of disinterest that takes real effort to perform. "Not my problem," she said, and went back to her phone. Kayla took a slow breath. She changed into her work blazer. She pinned her name tag. She tucked her bag into her locker, and in that bag was a small Ziploc pouch with $11 and some change, every dollar she had to her name until Friday's paycheck. She'd already packed her lunch. A peanut butter sandwich and an apple, nothing fancy, but it was hers and it was enough. She walked onto the floor at 8:51. Michael was already there, walking the floor with his hands behind his back like a general inspecting troops. He was tall, well-dressed, and had the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed with whatever it was looking at. He saw Kayla. "You're late," he said. I was told 8:50, Kayla replied. I'm here at 8:51. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. The directive was 8:45. Kayla paused. She'd just been told 8:50 30 seconds ago, but she knew better than to say that. She'd learned, slowly, painfully, that correcting Michael in public only ever made things worse for her later. I understand, she said. It won't happen again. Michael held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then he walked away. Vanessa, Kayla's closest friend on staff, appeared at her elbow like a short, loud guardian angel. He just changed it to 45, Vanessa whispered through a smile that didn't move her lips. Literally 5 minutes ago, I heard him tell Daniela. I know, Kayla murmured. And you're just going to let him. I need this job, Ness. Vanessa pressed her lips together. She looked like a woman physically restraining herself from a speech. Fine, she said at last. But one day, Kayla. One day, Kayla agreed. The morning passed in the usual rhythm. Customers came in. Kayla helped them, really helped them, asked about occasions, listened to stories, showed pieces that matched what they actually described rather than just what was most expensive. She was good at this. She knew she was good at this. By 11:30, she'd closed 2 sales. One for a silver bracelet set, $4,000. One for a custom engagement ring consultation that would likely result in a $20,000 commission order. She walked the engagement couple to the front desk to finalize the consultation paperwork. She came back to find Daniela already at the display case, tidying it up with an air of casual ownership. I just helped those clients, Kayla said. Daniela glanced at her. Michael reassigned the account, said you had an incomplete customer profile on file. Kayla stared. What incomplete profile? I just opened it. You're missing their 3rd contact preference field, Daniela said smoothly. Policy says incomplete profiles get reassigned to a senior associate. Kayla opened her mouth, then closed it. She'd seen this play run before. She would complain. Michael would confirm Daniela's story. HR would file it. Nothing would change. And Kayla would lose a commission she badly needed. Fine, she said softly. Vanessa, who had watched the whole thing from 6 feet away, looked like she was about to actually combust. But Kayla shot her a look that said not today, and Vanessa, with visible effort, turned back to her own client. This was Kayla's world. 8 months of this. Small injustices stacked on top of each other like bricks, each one survivable on its own. Together, they'd built a wall. It was just after noon when the door opened. The boutique was in its midday lull, a handful of browsers, no one serious yet. Most of the staff were halfway through their mental lunch breaks, even if their bodies were still on the floor. So when the door swung open and a small old woman shuffled in, almost everyone noticed. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet on a good day, bent slightly at the shoulders like she was leaning into a wind only she could feel. Her coat was beige and worn at the elbows. Her shoes were flat and sensible and had clearly done years of service. She wore a floral headscarf tied neatly at her chin, and she carried a small purse that looked like it had survived at least 3 decades. She looked around the boutique with calm, curious eyes. Brown eyes, sharp ones. The reaction was immediate and ugly. Daniela's nose wrinkled like she'd smelled something. 2 of the other associates exchanged glances and slight smirks. One customer at the far end of the case actually took a small step away, as if proximity was somehow contagious. And then Michael materialized. Ma'am, he said, with a tone that was technically polite and actually a door being slammed. Can I help you? The old woman smiled at him. I'd just like to look around a little, sweetheart. Michael's jaw tightened at the word sweetheart. This is a high-end boutique, he said, and let the sentence sit there doing its work. The old woman's smile didn't flicker. I can see that. Beautiful place. Our pieces start at $3,000, Michael continued. I just want to make sure we're a good fit for what you're looking for. Translation, you can't afford to breathe this air. Leave. Kayla, who had been standing near the back display case, felt something hot move through her chest. She'd heard that tone used on people before. She'd had it used on her, just not here. Not yet. The old woman looked at Michael with those sharp brown eyes. 3,000, she repeated, nodding slowly. That's fine, sweetheart. Michael blinked. He hadn't expected that answer. He looked like a man whose script had gone off the page. Well, he said after a beat, feel free to look, but we do require serious inquiries only. He turned and walked away, already dismissing her. Daniela leaned toward another associate and said something low that made both of them laugh. It wasn't loud enough to catch the words, but the old woman was close enough. She heard the tone. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Kayla watched all of this. She watched the old woman stand alone in the middle of the boutique while everyone looked through her or away from her. She watched her take slow steps toward the nearest display case, her hand resting on the glass as she peered at a row of diamond earrings. She watched the associate subtly drift away from that section, not running, just drifting, the way water avoids oil. Kayla walked over. "Good afternoon," she said warmly, stopping beside the old woman. "Those are beautiful, aren't they? The diamonds are conflict-free, sourced from Canada. The cut is called a modified princess cut. It catches light from more angles than the standard." The old woman looked up at her, a slow look, the kind that measured things. "You like your job," the old woman said. It wasn't a question. Kayla smiled. "I like jewelry," she said. "The job is complicated." The old woman gave a small sound that might have been a laugh. "Everything worth doing is complicated, baby." They stood together for a few minutes. Kayla showed her a few pieces, not pushing, just sharing. The old woman asked good questions, sharp ones. She knew what cut meant. She knew what carats were. She wasn't browsing blindly. Then the old woman straightened slightly and put a hand on Kayla's arm. "I wonder," she said, "if I could trouble you for a glass of water. My medication, I need to take it." Kayla didn't hesitate. "Of course. Sit right here, there's a chair just behind you. I'll be right back." She got the water, cold with ice, because the old woman had walked in from November cold, and Kayla somehow intuited that she liked cold water. She brought it on a small tray with a napkin. The old woman took the glass, took her pill, and then looked at Kayla with those sharp eyes for a long moment. "You're a good girl," she said quietly. "I'm just doing what anyone should do," Kayla said. The old woman shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "They should, but they don't. That's the whole point." She set the glass down. She looked around the boutique one more time, slowly, deliberately, at the staff who had barely acknowledged her existence. Then she looked back at Kayla. "I'd like to look at your finest diamond sets," she said. 10 of them, if you have that many worth showing." Kayla felt a small beat of something, excitement maybe, uncertainty. She nodded. "I can absolutely do that." What happened over the next 45 minutes was both the best and the worst professional moment of Kayla's life. The best because Kayla moved through the collection with genuine enthusiasm, pulling pieces, describing them, opening velvet cases, watching the old woman consider each one with quiet focus. The old woman had taste, real taste. She asked about origins, craftsmanship, setting styles. This wasn't a woman who didn't understand jewelry. The worst, because the rest of the boutique was watching. Daniela had gathered 2 other associates near the perfume display, close enough to observe, far enough to claim innocence. They watched Kayla work with expressions ranging from amused to contemptuous. Michael had come out of his office and was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed, watching. Vanessa was the only one watching with something like hope. After 45 minutes, Kayla laid out the final selection. 10 pieces in velvet cases, each one chosen to match the preferences the old woman had described. The combined value was sitting at just under $160,000. "These are my recommendations," Kayla said. "Based on everything you've told me, these are the ones that are both quality investments and genuinely beautiful to wear." The old woman looked at the cases. She looked at each piece. She nodded slowly. "I'll take all 10, she said. The boutique went absolutely silent. Kayla's heart jumped. $160,000. Even with Michael's commission games, even if he tried to reassign it, the sale was in progress on Kayla's client ID. This was hers. Wonderful, Kayla said. And her voice was steady even though her hands were not. Let me get the paperwork started. The total will be. Oh, the old woman said, and she patted her coat pockets. Then her purse. Then her coat again with the careful, searching movements of someone who already knew the answer. Oh dear. Kayla's smile held. Ma'am. My wallet, the old woman said softly. I don't have it with me. I must have left it at home. She looked genuinely embarrassed. My grandson usually handles my purchases. He was supposed to meet me here, but... She trailed off. I'm sorry, baby, I didn't think. The sound that came from near the perfume display was a laugh. More than one laugh, not even hidden. Oh my God, Daniela said, not even trying. She doesn't have any money. 45 minutes, someone else said, for nothing. Michael walked over, and his expression was the face of a man whose prediction had been confirmed in the most satisfying way possible. He looked at Kayla. He looked at the velvet cases. He looked at the old woman. Ma'am, he said, and the thin politeness was gone entirely now. I think it's time for you to go. The old woman looked at him. My grandson will. We don't operate on maybe, Michael said. You've taken up enough of our associates' time. I'd appreciate if you'd leave now. The old woman stood slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just looked at Kayla with those steady brown eyes that seemed to hold something Kayla couldn't quite name. And Kayla looked at her, this small woman who had just been humiliated for the crime of being old and not visibly wealthy, and made a decision. Wait, Kayla said. She walked to the break room. She opened her bag. She took out the Ziploc pouch with $11 and some change, every dollar she had until Friday. She took it all. She came back out and pressed it into the old woman's hands. It's not much, Kayla said quietly, but it should be enough for a cab home. The old woman looked down at the money in her hands, then up at Kayla. Her eyes had gone soft in a way that made Kayla's throat tighten. Baby, the old woman said, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to, Kayla said, and she meant it. The old woman squeezed her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Good things come back to good people, she murmured. You remember that. Then she smiled at Kayla, a slow, knowing smile that seemed bigger than the moment, and she walked out of Diamond and Grace into the November afternoon. The boutique was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Daniela's voice split the air. Did she really just give that woman money? She sounded almost impressed by the stupidity of it. That was her last dollar, I bet, someone else said, and laughed. Michael walked toward Kayla. His arms were folded again. His chin was up again. But now there was something sharper in his eyes, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. That, he said, loud and clear, is what I call a lesson in who belongs here and who doesn't. Kayla met his eyes. I wasn't talking about her, Michael said. I was talking about you. And then he said it, the words she'd half expected and fully dreaded. Clear out your locker, badge on my desk in 10 minutes. You're done here. The boutique was quiet again. That tight, held breath quiet, everyone watching. Kayla stood in the middle of it with her hands clenched, and her boots with the flapping sole and her now empty Ziploc pouch in her blazer pocket, and she breathed. She thought about 8 months of stolen commissions, 45 minutes of work that meant nothing, $11 that were supposed to feed her until Friday. She thought about the old woman's eyes when she pressed that money into her hands, that look that was almost like recognition. She thought about what Vanessa always said, one day, Kayla. She unpinned her badge. She placed it on the counter, not on Michael's desk, because he didn't deserve the walk. She took off her work blazer. She folded it neatly and set it beside the badge. Then she picked up her bag from the back, and she walked out of Diamond and Grace with her head exactly as high as it had been when she'd walked in that morning. She didn't look back. But if she had, she would have seen Vanessa giving her a standing ovation with 2 hands and absolutely no shame. And she would have seen Michael's expression, the triumph of a man who had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Outside, the November cold hit Kayla like a wall. She stood on Michigan Avenue with no job, no money, and the soft slap-slap-flap of her separating boot sole keeping time on the sidewalk. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry on Michigan Avenue. She walked 2 miles away, in a penthouse office on the 44th floor of the Apex Legacy Group Tower. A phone rang. Richard Brown's personal assistant, a sharp, efficient man named Donovan, answered it on the first ring. He listened. His eyebrows rose exactly once. He stood immediately and walked to the inner office, knocked twice, and opened the door. Richard Brown was seated at his desk reviewing acquisition documents. He was 34, built like someone who took the concept of discipline personally, and had the kind of still, watchful energy that made rooms quiet when he entered them. He looked up. "Your grandmother called," Donovan said. "She said she was just at Diamond and Grace." Richard's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "And," she said, Donovan checked his notepad, because Grandma Dorothy's exact words always deserved to be recorded accurately. "She said, pull the footage and look at the girl in the blue blazer, then call me back." Richard was quiet for a moment. That's it, sir." Richard considered this. His grandmother did not make cryptic requests without reason. She was 74 years old, had survived more than most people twice her age, and had earned the right to be listened to without question. He picked up his desk phone. "Get me the security feed from Diamond and Grace. Today, all of it." It took Donovan 11 minutes to pull the footage and get it onto the screen in Richard's office. Richard watched it with the same focused stillness he brought to everything. He watched the old woman in the floral scarf walk into the boutique. He watched the staff's reaction, the drift, the whispers, the deliberate coldness. He watched Michael's performance. He watched his grandmother move through the space with eyes that were measuring everything. And then he watched the girl in the blue blazer. He watched her walk over to his grandmother without hesitation. He watched her talk to her like a person, not a charity case, not an inconvenience, not a problem to be managed. He watched her bring water. He watched her spend 45 minutes pulling jewelry cases and talking and genuinely engaging. He watched her get mocked. He watched the commission theft set up in real time by Daniela. He watched Michael's performance when his grandmother revealed she didn't have her wallet. And then he watched the girl reach into her own bag. He watched her give his grandmother everything she had. Richard sat back in his chair. His face was still, unreadable. The face he wore in boardrooms and on television and when things were trying very hard to move him and almost never succeeded. But his right hand, resting on the desk, still holding a pen, had stopped moving completely. He pressed the intercom. "Donovan." "Sir." "Find out everything about the sales associate in the blue blazer, and pull Michael Cole's personnel file." A pause. "Yes, sir." Richard looked at the frozen frame on the screen. The girl standing on the sidewalk outside the boutique, her head up, her boots making that small sound on the pavement, walking away from a job she just lost for doing the right thing. He picked up his phone and called his grandmother. She answered on the second ring. "You watched it," she said. No greeting, no preamble, just the voice of a woman who already knew the answer. "I watched it," Richard said. "And?" Richard was quiet for a moment that held more weight than its length suggested. "Find her," he said. "Before she gets too far." Across town, Kayla Brown walked south on Michigan Avenue with no job, no money, and absolutely no idea that a black town car had just pulled away from the Apex Legacy Group Tower with one simple instruction from the most powerful man in Chicago. Find her. And in an armchair in a warm study on the north side of the city, Grandma Dorothy set down her phone, folded her hands in her lap, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. 1 cup of water. That's all it takes sometimes. 1 cup of water, freely given to the right person, at the right moment, and the whole world shifts on its axis. Good things come back to good people. She'd believed that her whole life. And she had just watched it prove itself true one more time. If this story already has your heart going, wait until you see what happens when Kayla walks through the doors of Apex Legacy Group and comes face to face with Richard Brown for the very first time, because neither of them is prepared for what happens next. Make sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell turned on, because you don't want to miss what happens next. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever been so low, so completely emptied out that you sat somewhere public and tried to figure out if you had enough change for a bus ride? Not a meal, not rent, a bus ride. Just enough to get yourself home so you could sit in the dark and figure out what to do next. That's exactly where Kayla Brown was. And what happened next? It's the kind of thing that doesn't happen in real life. Except this time, it did. Let's Go the laundromat on South Halsted smelled like warm lint and cheap detergent. It was the kind of place where the fluorescent lights buzzed just loud enough to remind you they existed, and at least 2 of the dryers had handwritten, out-of-order signs taped to their doors with masking tape that had turned yellow from age. Kayla sat in a plastic chair near the window. She wasn't doing laundry. She had no laundry to do. She was sitting there because it was warm, and outside it was 31 degrees, and she had nowhere else to go that didn't cost money she no longer had. Her phone sat in her lap. She'd already done the math 3 times. Rent was due in 9 days. She had exactly $0 in her checking account. Her savings account, the one she called her emergency fund with the kind of dark humor that only poor people truly understand, had $14 in it. $14 that she'd been keeping untouched for 4 months because the number 14 felt like something. Like proof that she wasn't completely broke. Like a floor beneath the floor. Now even that felt like a lie. She'd applied for 3 jobs on her phone in the last hour. 2 retail positions and a restaurant hostess opening. All of them required references. And the only professional reference she had from the last 8 months was Diamond and Grace, which meant Michael Cole. Kayla stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed, her phone vibrated. Vanessa, she answered. Where are you? Vanessa's voice came through hot and fast, like she'd been holding her breath for an hour and had just remembered how lungs worked. I've been calling you. Are you okay? Don't answer that, of course you're not okay. That man is the devil's personal assistant. I'm not even joking, Kayla. I looked into his eyes today and I saw brimstone. Kayla almost smiled. Almost. I'm at the laundromat on Halsted. The one with the broken dryers. They're all broken, Ness. Are you at a laundromat? Because it's warm. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause where someone's heart breaks quietly and they pretend it didn't. I'm coming, Vanessa said. You don't have to. I said I'm coming. Don't move, don't disappear. Don't do that thing where you convince yourself you don't need anybody because you've been alone your whole life and asking for help feels like losing. I know you, Kayla Monique Brown. Stay. Put. The call ended. Kayla looked at her phone. The screen went dark. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, tight jaw, the face of a woman who had been holding herself together with nothing but willpower and habit. She thought about the old woman at the boutique. The way she'd squeezed Kayla's hand, the warmth in her voice. Good things come back to good people. Kayla wanted to believe that. She really did. But sitting in a laundromat with $14 to her name and no job and no family and rent due in 9 days, belief felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The door of the laundromat opened. Kayla looked up, expecting Vanessa. Vanessa was fast, but not that fast. The boutique was at least 20 minutes away even if she'd sprinted to her car. It wasn't Vanessa. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, clean-shaven. Wearing a dark navy suit that fit him like it had been personally apologized to by the fabric for any inconvenience during tailoring. His shoes were polished to the kind of shine that only happened when someone else did the polishing. He carried himself with the specific posture of a person who opened doors for other people professionally. He looked around the laundromat with the restrained expression of someone who had clearly never been inside one before and was processing several emotions about it simultaneously. Then his eyes found Kayla. Miss Brown, he said. Kayla's entire body went still. Who's asking? The man stepped forward. My name is Donovan Price. I'm the personal assistant to Mr. Richard Brown, CEO of Apex Legacy Group. The laundromat's dryer number 4 chose this exact moment to make a loud grinding noise and then stop completely. A woman across the room kicked it. It started again. Kayla stared at Donovan. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Brown would like to meet with you, Donovan said, his voice as smooth and professional as his suit. At your earliest convenience. Kayla blinked, then blinked again. She looked around the laundromat as if searching for a hidden camera crew. She looked back at Donovan. Richard Brown, she repeated slowly. The Richard Brown, Apex Legacy Group Richard Brown. Yes, ma'am, wants to meet me. Yes, ma'am. Why? Donovan paused. It was a small pause, barely a breath, but Kayla caught it. It relates to an interaction you had earlier today at Diamond and Grace with an elderly woman. Kayla's stomach dropped. The woman from the shop, is she okay? Did something happen to her? Donovan allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. She's quite well, Miss Brown. In fact, she's the one who asked Mr. Brown to find you. Kayla's mind was spinning so fast she could almost hear it. Richard Brown, Apex Legacy, the old woman. None of these things connected in any universe she understood. How did you find me? She asked. Your employee file at Diamond and Grace listed your home address, Donovan said. Your neighbor mentioned you sometimes come here. Kayla made a mental note to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson about giving her location to strangers in expensive suits. Then she made a second mental note that Mrs. Patterson would absolutely give her location to any stranger in an expensive suit, because Mrs. Patterson had been trying to set Kayla up with a nice young man for 2 years and would consider this divine intervention. Miss Brown, Donovan continued, I understand this is unexpected. But I assure you, Mr. Brown's intentions are entirely professional. I have a car outside. The drive is approximately 20 minutes. You're welcome to call someone and share your location if that makes you more comfortable. Kayla looked at him. She looked at the laundromat. She looked at dryer number 4, which had started making the grinding noise again. Something inside her, the same something that had walked her over to the old woman earlier that day when everyone else had walked away, said 2 words. Go, Kayla, she picked up her bag. I need to make a phone call first. She called Vanessa. Ness, change of plans. I need you to write down this license plate number. The car was a black Mercedes sedan. Not a limousine, Kayla noted this with a strange sense of relief. It was luxurious without being absurd. The leather seats were heated. The interior smelled like something expensive and clean that Kayla couldn't name but immediately wanted a candle of. They drove north through the city. Kayla watched the neighborhoods change through the tinted window, the buildings getting taller, the streets getting wider, the cars getting shinier. Every mile felt like crossing into another country. Donovan sat in the front passenger seat. The driver, a quiet, focused man named Gerald, navigated traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a very long time. Can I ask you something? Kayla said. Donovan half-turned. Of course. Woman from the store today, who is she? Donovan was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, I think Mr. Brown would prefer to explain that himself. That's not an answer. No, ma'am, it's not. Kayla almost smiled. She respected a man who could dodge a question honestly. The car turned onto a tree-lined street that Kayla had never seen before. The houses, no, the estates, sat back from the road behind iron gates and stone walls. Each one looked like it contained its own zip code. The car slowed and turned through a set of tall iron gates that opened silently as they approached. The driveway curved through a manicured lawn that was somehow still green in November, because apparently when you had enough money, even the grass cooperated. And then Kayla saw the house. It wasn't a house. Calling it a house was like calling the ocean a puddle. It was a stone and glass estate that rose 3 stories and spread wide enough to have wings. Actual architectural wings. The front entrance had columns, not decorative ones, structural ones, and the kind of double doors that suggested the people inside had never once in their lives had to push hard to open anything. Kayla's mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. Is this, she started. Brown family residence, Donovan confirmed. Mr. Brown and Mrs. Dorothy Brown live here. Dorothy Brown, Dorothy, the old woman's name was Dorothy, and she lived here, in this palace disguised as a house. Kayla's brain did the math slowly, like a calculator running on dying batteries. The old woman in the worn coat and flat shoes and floral headscarf. The woman she'd given her last $11 to for a cab ride. That woman lived in a house with columns and wings and a driveway longer than Kayla's entire block. The car stopped. Gerald opened Kayla's door. She stepped out and her broken boot made its familiar flapping sound against the stone pathway. Slap. Flap. She looked down at her boot. She looked up at the mansion. She considered, briefly, that the universe might be playing the longest, most elaborate practical joke in recorded history. Donovan led her up the front steps. The doors opened before they reached them, because of course they did, and Kayla stepped into a foyer that made Diamond and Grace look like a mall kiosk, marble floors. A staircase that curved upward like it was posing for a photograph. A chandelier made of crystal and what appeared to be controlled starlight. Fresh flowers on a table that was itself probably worth more than everything Kayla owned combined. This way, please, Donovan said. They walked through a hallway lined with art that Kayla was 70% sure she'd seen in textbooks. They passed a sitting room, a library, Another sitting room, because apparently one sitting room was insufficient for the amount of sitting that happened here. And then Donovan opened a set of double doors into a room that was somehow both an office and a living space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the back grounds of the estate. 2 people were in the room. One of them was Dorothy. She was sitting in a large armchair near the window, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and elegant slacks. Her hair, free of the headscarf now, was silver and natural and beautiful. She looked like a completely different woman from the one who'd walked into Diamond and Grace that morning. Same sharp eyes, though, same knowing smile, and standing near the desk with his hands in his pockets and his gaze already fixed on Kayla like he'd been waiting, was Richard Brown. Kayla had seen his face before. Everyone in Chicago had. Magazine covers, business journals, the occasional news segment about another acquisition or another building with his name attached to it. In photographs, he looked composed, distant, untouchable. In person, he looked like all of those things but more. There was a weight to his presence that photographs didn't capture, a stillness. He wasn't just standing in the room, he was anchoring it. He was also, Kayla noted with the part of her brain that was not currently short-circuiting, extremely handsome. Unfairly so. The kind of handsome that made you briefly forget your own name and then feel annoyed about it afterward. "Miss Brown," he said. His voice was low and even, not warm exactly, but not cold either, measured, like every word had been weighed before it was released. "Mr. Brown," Kayla said, and then because her brain was still buffering, added, "That's confusing. We have the same last name." Richard's eyebrow lifted by approximately 1 millimeter. Dorothy in her armchair let out a soft laugh. "No relation, I assume," Richard said. And was that the ghost of a smile? "Definitely no relation," Kayla said, looking around the room. "I think I'd remember this house." Dorothy clapped her hands once, delighted. "Oh, I like her. Sit down, baby, sit down." Kayla sat. Her boot flapped softly as she crossed her legs, and she immediately uncrossed them. There was a silence, not an uncomfortable one, an assessing one. Richard was studying her with the same focus he probably brought to contracts and mergers, like he was reading the fine print of a person. "I watched the security footage from Diamond and Grace," he said. Kayla felt her cheeks warm. "Okay." "All of it." "That's okay." "You helped my grandmother when every other person in that store either ignored her or actively tried to remove her." Kayla glanced at Dorothy. "Your grandmother." Dorothy gave a small wave. "Surprise, baby." Kayla took a breath. "Mrs. Brown, I didn't know." "Dorothy," the old woman corrected gently. "And that's exactly the point, sweetheart. You didn't know. You helped me because you wanted to, not because of who I was. That's rarer than every diamond in that store put together." Kayla's throat tightened. She pressed her lips together and nodded, not trusting her voice. Richard spoke again. "You also gave her your last dollar." "It was $11, Kayla said quietly, "and some change." "Your last $11. "Yes." Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he reached beside his desk and gestured to a row of elegant boxes that Kayla hadn't noticed, large ones, wrapped in ribbon, sitting against the wall like they'd been waiting for her. "I'd like to thank you," he said. "Consider these a token of appreciation for—" "No," Kayla said. The word came out before she'd fully thought about it, but once it was out, she didn't take it back. Richard paused. His hand was still mid-gesture toward the boxes. He looked at her like she'd just spoken in a language he didn't recognize. "No," he repeated. "I appreciate it," Kayla said, and she meant it. "But I didn't help your grandmother because I wanted something. I did it because—" she searched for the right words. "Because she was a person, standing in a room full of people who treated her like she wasn't, and I know what that feels like." Dorothy's eyes glistened. She pressed a hand to her chest but said nothing. Richard lowered his hand slowly. He stared at Kayla for a long moment, a moment that stretched and stretched until the air in the room felt heavy with it. "You're refusing gifts," he said, as if confirming something impossible. "From a billionaire." "I'm refusing gifts I didn't earn," Kayla clarified. "There's a difference." Richard leaned back against his desk. He folded his arms. He tilted his head slightly. And for the first time since Kayla had walked into this room, something shifted in his expression. Something cracked just a fraction in that controlled, measured exterior. "What would you accept?" he asked. "A job," Kayla said. She hadn't planned to say it, but there it was, honest and direct and completely terrifying. "I need a job. I lost mine today, as you saw. I'm good at what I do. I work hard. I show up. I don't steal commissions, and I don't bully people, and I don't judge customers by their shoes." She paused. "I'd like to earn my way. If there's a position available anywhere in your company, even entry level, I'd like the chance to apply. Properly. Through whatever process everyone else goes through." The room was silent. Dorothy was beaming. Actually beaming, like sunlight had taken human form and settled into an armchair. Richard unfolded his arms. He walked around his desk, sat down, and opened a folder that had been sitting there. "As it happens," he said, and his voice had a different texture now, still measured, but warmer underneath, like something had thawed by exactly 1 degree, "I've been looking for a personal assistant. The position has been open for 3 weeks. I've interviewed 14 candidates." "What happened to the 14 candidates?" Kayla asked. "They were all impressive on paper," Richard said. "None of them were impressive as people." He closed the folder. "The job pays well, benefits included. You'd work directly with me, my schedule, my meetings, my correspondence. It's demanding. The hours are long. I'm not easy to work for." "I worked for Michael Cole for 8 months," Kayla said. "I can handle difficult." That ghost of a smile again. This time it stayed a fraction longer. "When can you start?" he asked. "Tomorrow." Richard nodded once. "Donovan will send you the details tonight." And just like that, sitting in a billionaire's study, wearing a coat with fraying sleeves and boots that needed repair, with $14 in her savings and nothing in her checking, Kayla Brown got the job that would change the entire direction of her life. Dorothy insisted that Kayla stay at the estate, not permanently, just temporarily, while she got settled. "The guest suite has its own entrance," Dorothy said, in the tone of someone who had already decided this was happening and was now simply informing everyone involved. "You'll have privacy, your own space, and I'll have company. An old woman gets lonely in this big house." Kayla looked at the mansion around her. "Mrs. Brown, Dorothy, this is too much. I can find my own." "Baby," Dorothy said, and her voice was gentle but immovable, like a river that had been flowing in one direction for 74 years and was not about to change course for anyone. "You gave me your last dollar when you thought I was a stranger with nothing. Let me give you a room when I know you're a good woman who needs one." Kayla opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. Then she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt taken care of. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard and nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Dorothy squeezed her hand, that same strong grip from the boutique, and smiled. The first 2 weeks were a revelation. Kayla threw herself into the PA role with everything she had. She arrived at Apex Legacy headquarters at 7 every morning. She organized Richard's schedule with a precision that made Donovan raise his eyebrows in quiet approval. She prepared briefing documents. She coordinated meetings. She anticipated needs before they were spoken, because Kayla had spent her whole life reading rooms and reading people, and it turned out that skill was worth more in a corporate office than any degree. Richard noticed. He didn't say it directly. Richard Brown was not a man who gave compliments casually, or possibly at all, but Kayla saw the small signs. He stopped double-checking her work after the first week. He started asking for her opinion in meetings, not performatively, but genuinely, as if her perspective mattered. Once, when she reorganized his filing system without being asked, he looked at it for a long moment and then said, "This is better." From Richard Brown, that was practically a standing ovation. They developed a rhythm, a language of efficiency and mutual respect that operated in looks and nods, and the occasional dry exchange that might, under laboratory conditions, qualify as humor. "Your 3 o'clock canceled," Kayla said one afternoon, setting his coffee on his desk, black, no sugar, because Richard Brown apparently did not believe in sweetness in any form. "Which 3 o'clock?" Richard asked without looking up. "Henderson, the real estate developer." "What reason?" His assistant said scheduling conflict, but he posted a photo on Instagram 20 minutes ago at a golf course in Scottsdale. Richard looked up. "You follow Henderson on Instagram?" "I follow everyone you meet with on Instagram," Kayla said. "You'd be surprised what people announce to the world when they think no one's paying attention." Richard stared at her for a moment. "Remind me never to underestimate you." "You haven't so far," Kayla said and walked out. She was pretty sure she heard him exhale through his nose in a way that might have been a laugh, but she couldn't confirm it. Richard Brown's laughs, like his compliments, existed in a frequency that required specialized equipment to detect. Vanessa, meanwhile, was handling the entire situation with the calm and measured restraint of a woman watching her best friend's life turn into a movie. Which is to say, she was handling it with no restraint whatsoever. "Me get this straight," Vanessa said over FaceTime that evening. She was sitting on her bed with a bag of hot chips and an expression of intense focus. "The old lady from the store, the one Michael threw out, is the grandmother of Richard Brown. The Richard Brown, and now you work for him, and you live in his house." "In the guest suite," Kayla clarified. "It has a separate entrance." "Girl, does the guest suite have a chandelier?" Kayla looked up. "Yes." Vanessa threw a hot chip in the air and caught it in her mouth. "You're living in a fairy tale. I need you to understand that. This is Cinderella. You are Cinderella." "I'm not Cinderella. I'm a personal assistant." Cinderella was basically a personal assistant. She did chores. She got a glow-up. She ended up with the prince. The math is mathing, Kayla. There is no prince. There is absolutely a prince. His name is Richard, and he has cheekbones that could cut glass and a net worth that could buy a small country. And he personally asked you to work for him, and you live in his house. Guest suite, separate entrance. Details. I want to know one thing. Is he fine in person? Kayla paused. It was a very brief pause, maybe half a second, but Vanessa caught it like a hawk catching a field mouse. "Oh," Vanessa said, pointing at the screen. That pause, that was a yes pause. That was a "he's so fine, I need a moment to pretend he's not" pause. "I know that pause, Kayla." "Night, Vanessa. This is the greatest day of my life, and it didn't even happen to me." "Good night, Vanessa." Everything was going well, too well, and Kayla should have known that in her life good things didn't get to exist peacefully. They always attracted a storm. The storm's name was Jennifer Cole. She arrived on a Tuesday. Kayla heard her before she saw her, the sharp staccato of designer heels on marble, moving with the speed and purpose of someone who owned every room she'd ever entered and had never once been corrected about it. Kayla was at her desk outside Richard's office when the elevator doors opened, and Jennifer stepped out like a magazine cover coming to life. She was tall, stunning, wearing a winter white suit that probably cost more than Kayla's first apartment. Her hair was pressed straight and fell past her shoulders. Her makeup was flawless. Her energy was ice. Jennifer's eyes swept the hallway, landed on Kayla, and performed a full scan in approximately 1.2 seconds. Shoes, clothes, hair, nails, desk, nameplate, everything. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "New," Jennifer said. "I'm Kayla, Mr. Brown's personal assistant," Kayla replied politely. "Do you have an appointment?" Jennifer smiled. It was the kind of smile that arrived at the mouth but never quite reached the eyes. "I don't need an appointment, sweetheart. I'm Jennifer Cole." She said her name the way people say passwords, expecting doors to open automatically. "MS. Cole, Mr. Brown is in a meeting right now," Kayla said, keeping her voice professional. "I can let him know you're here as soon as—" Jennifer was already walking past her. She pushed open the door to Richard's office without knocking, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. Kayla stared at the closed door. She took a slow breath. Then she picked up her phone and texted Donovan 2 words. "Jennifer Cole." Donovan texted back 1 word. Noted. Inside the office, Kayla could hear Jennifer's voice, bright, musical, possessive. "Darling, you didn't tell me you hired a new assistant. She's cute, in a simple sort of way." Richard's response was too low to hear through the door. But whatever he said, Jennifer's laugh rang out a moment later, high and confident and entirely for show. When the door finally opened 20 minutes later, Jennifer emerged looking triumphant. She stopped at Kayla's desk. "Could you be a doll and get me a sparkling water?" Jennifer asked. "Room temperature. San Pellegrino, not Perrier. I can taste the difference." Kayla looked at her evenly. I'm Mr. Brown's assistant, Ms. Cole, not a refreshment coordinator, but I'm happy to point you toward the executive kitchen. Jennifer's smile tightened by exactly 1 degree. Her eyes hardened by 2. Of course, she said sweetly. My mistake. She turned and walked toward the elevator, but just before she stepped in, she looked over her shoulder at Kayla. Enjoy the job while it lasts, sweetheart, she said softly. Things change quickly around here. Elevator doors closed. Kayla sat at her desk, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. She had just made an enemy. And this enemy had resources, connections, and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer's campaign was relentless and surgical. It started with whispers, small ones, planted in break rooms and hallways and after-hours drinks with senior staff. Did you hear how she got the job? Richard's grandmother basically forced him to hire her. I heard she was living in the house before she even started working here. You do the math. She's pretty, I guess, if you're into that whole struggling and helpless thing. Rumors multiplied. They grew teeth. By the end of the first week, Kayla could feel the shift, the way colleagues who'd been warming up to her suddenly cooled. The way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The way people looked at her with something between pity and suspicion. And then there was Michael. Michael Cole, Jennifer's brother, the same man who'd fired Kayla from Diamond and Grace, still worked at the company. Technically, Diamond and Grace was a subsidiary of Apex Legacy Group. Michael's position was under review, but he hadn't been terminated yet. When he found out that the woman he'd fired was now sitting outside the CEO's office, his face went through approximately 7 emotions in 4 seconds. None of them were pleasant. He never said anything to Kayla directly. But she could feel his presence at the edges of things, in meetings he attended unnecessarily, in reports that mysteriously went missing from her desk, in the small administrative obstacles that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Jennifer and Michael were a team. They always had been. And now they had one shared mission: get rid of Kayla. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Kayla had stayed late to finish a report. The office was nearly empty, just her, the cleaning crew, and the hum of empty hallways. She finished the report, emailed it to Richard, and was packing up when her phone buzzed. It was Donovan. Check the family vault. Security flagged a discrepancy. Kayla frowned. She wasn't usually involved with the vault, that was a different department. But Donovan was meticulous. If he was flagging something to her, there was a reason. She took the elevator down to the secure level and entered the vault anteroom. The security panel showed green, no alarms, no breaches. She was about to text Donovan back when she noticed the inner vault door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Inside, the vault was exactly as it should be: rows of display cases, soft lighting, temperature-controlled air. Everything in place, except one case. A case that should have held a sapphire and diamond necklace, valued at $275,000, was empty. Kayla's blood went cold. She turned to leave, to call security, to call Donovan, to call anyone, and nearly collided with Michael Cole, who was standing in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the empty case. And then he smiled. Well, he said, pulling out his phone, this doesn't look good for you. 20 minutes later, the estate erupted. Security arrived. Then Jennifer. Then Patricia, Richard's mother, who had flown in from New York 2 days earlier and had been watching Kayla with the quiet, evaluating gaze of a woman measuring a threat. And the evidence looked damning. The vault access log showed that Kayla's security badge had been used to enter the vault at 6:47 p.m. The necklace was gone. She was standing in the room when Michael found her. I didn't take anything, Kayla said, her voice steady but her hands trembling. I was told to come down here. Donovan texted me. Donovan says he never sent you a text, Michael said smoothly. Kayla's stomach dropped. She pulled up her phone. The text from Donovan was gone. The entire conversation thread deleted. She stared at her screen. It was here. I swear it was right here. Someone deleted. Convenient, Jennifer murmured from behind Patricia, her voice dripping with theatrical sympathy. Patricia Brown looked at Kayla with an expression that was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was confirmed. The look of a woman who had suspected the worst and was now watching it proven. I told you, Patricia said quietly to no one in particular. I told all of you. Dorothy was there too. She had come from her study, moving slowly but with purpose. Her face was calm, but her eyes were fierce. This girl is not a thief, Dorothy said firmly. I know her. Has more integrity in her little finger than... Mother, Patricia interrupted gently. The evidence means nothing, Dorothy snapped. Evidence can be manufactured, character cannot. But the whispers were already spreading. The security team was exchanging looks. The staff who had gathered in the hallway were murmuring. Even the people who had started to like Kayla were looking at her differently now. Kayla felt it, the shift, the weight of a room deciding about her without waiting for the truth. She looked around. She looked at Jennifer, whose face was a mask of concern that couldn't quite hide the satisfaction beneath. She looked at Michael, whose smile had been replaced by a carefully neutral expression that was somehow worse. She looked at Patricia, who had already made up her mind. And she looked at Dorothy, the only person in the room whose eyes still held belief. Kayla's vision blurred. She blinked hard. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. I didn't do this, Kayla said quietly. She said it once clearly to the room. Then she picked up her bag. Kayla, Dorothy started. It's okay, Dorothy, Kayla said softly. And she managed a small smile, cracked and hurt but real. It's okay. She walked out of the vault room, down the hallway, through the foyer with the chandelier and the marble staircase and the flowers that cost more than her rent. She walked out the front door. She walked down the stone pathway, slap, flap, slap her boots, same broken sole. Making the same sound they'd made the day she walked out of Diamond and Grace. She walked through the iron gates. She didn't look back. Inside, Dorothy turned to the room. Her eyes were burning. Find my grandson, she said. Now! Richard was in a meeting downtown when Donovan reached him. He listened without interrupting. When Donovan finished, Richard said 3 words. The footage. He was back at the estate within 40 minutes. He went directly to his private office. He locked the door. He sat down at his computer, and he watched. The security cameras in the Apex Legacy Vault were high-definition, multi-angle, and backed up to 3 separate servers, because Richard Brown did not leave security to chance. He watched the footage from 5:00 p.m. onward, frame by frame. At 5:22 p.m., a figure entered the vault using a duplicate access badge. The badge number matched Kayla's, but the figure was not Kayla. It was Jennifer. Richard watched Jennifer open the case. Remove the necklace. Place it in a small bag, close the case. Walk out. He watched her walk down the hallway to the guest wing, Kayla's guest suite. He watched her enter with a key she should not have had. He watched her place the bag inside a drawer. He watched her leave. He watched her send a text, presumably the spoofed message to Kayla's phone from Donovan's number. He watched her call Michael. He watched her set the entire trap, piece by piece, with the calm efficiency of someone who had done terrible things before and had simply never been caught. Richard sat back in his chair. His face was still, absolutely still. The kind of still that preceded storms. He pressed his intercom. Donovan. Sir, Jennifer Cole to the estate. Tell her I want to discuss next steps regarding Kayla's termination. She'll come immediately. Michael, him too. He paused. Find Kayla. I don't care if you have to check every laundromat in Chicago. Find her and tell her. He stopped. For the first time in the conversation, his voice lost its measured calm. Tell her she was right, and tell her I'm sorry. He looked at the frozen frame on his screen. Jennifer's face caught mid-step in the hallway, the stolen necklace in her hand. And Donovan? Sir, bring the footage. I want everyone to see it. And now the real question, the one that's probably been burning in the back of your mind since this all started. What happens when Jennifer Cole walks into that room expecting a victory celebration and finds Richard Brown standing there with a screen full of evidence and a look on his face that could freeze the Chicago River in July? And what about Kayla? Where is she? What's she doing right now, right at this moment, thinking she's lost everything for the second time, and the biggest question of all, one that even Kayla doesn't know the answer to yet, does she go back? After everything they've done to her. After being framed and humiliated and doubted. If Richard Brown shows up at her door with the truth and an apology and something else, something she never expected, does she go back? That answer is coming. Let me tell you something about storms. Real storms, the kind that shake foundations and rip rooftops clean off and make you question everything you thought was solid. Those storms don't start with thunder. They start with silence. A heavy, pressing, unnatural silence where the air goes still and the birds stop singing and everything holds its breath. That's exactly what was happening inside the Brown family estate on this cold Thursday night in Chicago. Jennifer Cole was about to walk into the worst moment of her life. She just didn't know it yet. And somewhere across town, sitting on the edge of a borrowed bed in Vanessa King's tiny one-bedroom apartment, Kayla Brown was staring at the wall and trying to remember how to breathe. Let's start with Kayla. Vanessa's apartment was small. Not cozy small, survival small. The kind of apartment where the kitchen, the living room, and the dining room were all the same room, and that room was also partially the hallway. The walls were thin enough to hear Mr. Domings next door watching his telenovelas at full volume every single night. The radiator worked when it wanted to, which was rarely, and never when it was actually cold. But it was warm tonight. Because Vanessa had turned on the oven and left the door open, her grandmother's trick for heating an apartment when the landlord decided that functioning radiators were optional. Kayla sat on the bed. Vanessa sat on the floor in front of her, cross-legged, with 2 mugs of tea she had made without asking because Vanessa understood that sometimes people needed things they wouldn't ask for. Kayla hadn't cried yet. She wanted to. She could feel it sitting behind her eyes like water behind a dam, heavy and patient and waiting, but she held it, because crying meant accepting that this was real, and some part of her still couldn't believe it. "Tell me again," Vanessa said gently. "Slowly this time," Kayla told her. The text, the vault, the empty case. Michael standing in the doorway with that smile. Jennifer's voice behind Patricia, Dorothy's fierce defense. The looks on everyone's faces, not all cruel, but all doubting. All choosing the easy story over the true one. When she finished, the apartment was quiet except for Mr. Domings's telenovela bleeding through the wall. Someone on the show was crying. Dramatic music played underneath. Vanessa took a long breath. "So let me understand this correctly. Jennifer, the woman who has been circling Richard Brown like a vulture in Valentino for 3 years, framed you. Her brother Michael, the same Michael who fired you from Diamond and Grace for being a decent human being, helped her. And they used your badge, spoofed a text from Donovan, planted a stolen necklace in your room and made it look like you, the woman who gave her last $11 to a stranger, are a thief." Kayla nodded. Vanessa set her mug down with the careful precision of a woman who was about to say something important. "These people are going to jail." "Ness, I'm serious, Kayla. This isn't workplace drama. This is a crime, multiple crimes, identity fraud, theft, evidence tampering." "I know what it is," Kayla said quietly. "But it doesn't matter, they have the story they want. Patricia already believed it before the necklace was even missing. The staff saw me standing in that vault. Michael was right there to witness it. It's done." "It's not done," Vanessa said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Since when has that mattered?" Kayla's voice cracked, just slightly. Just enough for Vanessa to hear the fracture beneath. Vanessa reached up and took Kayla's hands. "It matters," she said. "It matters because you're the best person I know. And I know you're tired. I know you've been fighting your whole life and you're exhausted, and right now everything in you is saying to just give up and walk away and accept that the world is cruel and unfair and will always be cruel and unfair. I know that voice. But Kayla, that voice is a liar." Kayla looked at her best friend. The tears she'd been holding finally broke free. One, then another. Then a flood she couldn't stop. Vanessa pulled her into a hug and held her while she cried. Not the pretty kind of crying. The ugly, gasping, whole-body kind that happens when you've been strong for too long and your body finally overrides your pride. "Got you," Vanessa whispered. "I've got you." Outside, the Chicago wind rattled the windows. The radiator clicked once and went silent again. Mr. Domings's telenovela reached its dramatic climax, and 15 miles north, in a mansion with marble floors and controlled starlight, a trap was being set. Not for Kayla. For the people who had tried to destroy her. Jennifer Cole arrived at the Brown estate at exactly 9:14 p.m. She was dressed for victory, a charcoal designer dress, her best diamond earrings, heels that added 3 inches and approximately 40% more confidence. She had reapplied her lipstick in the car twice. This was her moment. Richard had called. He wanted to discuss next steps regarding Kayla. In Jennifer's mind, that could only mean one thing. He'd finally seen the truth. The girl was a fraud, a thief, a nobody who had somehow wormed her way into his grandmother's affections and nearly into his life. And now she was gone. Jennifer allowed herself a small smile as she walked through the front doors. The foyer chandelier caught her earrings and sent tiny rainbows across the marble floor. She smoothed her dress. She composed her expression into something that was part concerned friend, part trusted advisor, part future wife. The exact cocktail she'd been perfecting for 3 years. She was directed to the main sitting room. The large one. The one with the fireplace and the family portraits and enough square footage to host a small wedding. She walked in and stopped. The room was not empty. It was very, very full. Richard stood near the fireplace. His arms were at his sides. His expression was the kind of calm that wasn't calm at all. It was controlled fury compressed into human form. His jaw was set so tightly that the muscles in his neck were visible. Dorothy sat in her armchair, the same armchair she always sat in, the one near the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on Jennifer with a look that could have withered flowers. Patricia sat on the sofa. Her posture was perfect, as always, but her face, Patricia's carefully maintained, aristocratic, never-surprised face, was different tonight. Something had shifted in it. Something had cracked. Donovan stood by the door. 2 security officers from Apex Legacy stood beside him, and on the wall behind Richard a large screen had been set up. It was dark. Waiting. Michael was already there. He was sitting in a chair near the corner, and unlike Jennifer, he was not smiling. He was not dressed for victory. He looked like a man who had walked into a room and immediately realized he was in the wrong room. His face was pale. His hands were in his lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles white. Jennifer looked at all of them. She processed the room in 2 seconds. Something was wrong. But Jennifer Cole was not a woman who showed uncertainty. She had been trained since childhood to project confidence even when the ground was crumbling beneath her. "Richard," she said warmly, walking toward him. "I came as soon as you called. I know today was difficult, but I think—" "Sit down, Jennifer," Richard said. His voice was quiet, level, and absolutely terrifying. Jennifer's step faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Then she recovered, arranged her face into a concerned expression, and sat down on the sofa across from Patricia. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need." Richard looked at her for a long moment. He studied her the way she had seen him study contracts, line by line, searching for the flaw, the weakness, the lie hidden in the fine print. Then he picked up a remote control from the mantelpiece. He pressed a button. The screen behind him lit up, and Jennifer's world ended. The footage was crystal clear. High definition, multi-angle, time-stamped, 5:22 p.m., Jennifer entering the vault with a duplicate access badge. 5:23 p.m., Jennifer opening the display case. Her hands, manicured, steady, familiar, lifting the sapphire and diamond necklace from its velvet bed. 5:24 p.m., Jennifer placing the necklace in a small silk bag. Walking out. Checking the hallway both directions. Moving quickly but not running because running would look suspicious. 5:26 p.m., Jennifer entering the guest wing. Using a key she should never have possessed to open Kayla's suite. Walking inside. Opening a drawer, placing the bag inside, closing the drawer. 5:28 p.m., Jennifer leaving the suite, pulling out her phone, typing. Presumably sending the spoof text to Kayla's phone, the text that was designed to lure her to the vault at exactly the right moment. 5:29 p.m., Jennifer calling someone. The security log confirmed the number. It was Michael's. The footage played for approximately 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, the room did not make a sound. Not a breath, not a whisper, not the creak of a chair. When it ended, Richard turned off the screen. He set the remote down on the mantelpiece. He turned to face Jennifer. Jennifer's face had gone through several stages during the footage. First, confusion, then recognition, then denial, her mouth opening slightly, her head shaking in small, involuntary movements. Then fear, real fear, the kind that strips away all the polish and performance and leaves nothing but the raw, exposed truth of who a person really is. "That's," Jennifer's voice came out thin and high. "That's not, you can't, Richard, that footage is." "What?" Richard said softly. "Fake. Doctored. That's not you in the vault wearing the same dress you wore today. Those aren't your hands, that's not your face. Someone must have, it could be Jennifer." Richard's voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "Stop." Jennifer stopped. The room breathed. Richard took one step toward her. "You stole a $275,000 necklace from my family's private vault. You planted it in an innocent woman's room. You fabricated evidence to frame her for a crime she didn't commit. You did all of this, and you stood in this room tonight with a smile on your face, ready to celebrate her destruction." Jennifer's eyes darted to Michael. Michael was staring at the floor. He was not going to save her. He was barely saving himself. "Richard, please," Jennifer whispered. The composure was gone now, completely gone. Her voice was trembling. Her mascara was starting to run because tears were forming, real tears this time, not the theatrical kind she produced for cameras and sympathetic interviews. "I did it because I love you, Everything I've done, it's because I love you and I couldn't stand watching you throw your life away on some. Somewhat, Richard said. Finish the sentence, Jennifer. Jennifer pressed her lips together. Some nobody, Richard continued, his voice dangerously soft. Some poor girl. Some woman who isn't from the right family, who doesn't wear the right clothes, who doesn't have the right connections. Jennifer flinched. Me tell you something about Kayla Brown, Richard said, and for the first time the controlled calm in his voice shifted, not into anger, into something deeper than anger, something that sounded almost like reverence. Kayla Brown walked into a store where she was treated like dirt. She watched every single person in that room dismiss an old woman because of how she looked. And instead of joining them, instead of protecting herself, which she had every reason to do, she walked over. She offered kindness. She offered her time. And then she offered her last dollar, not because she knew who my grandmother was, not because she expected anything in return, but because she is a genuinely good human being. He paused. The silence was devastating. You have had every advantage, Richard continued. Money, education, family connections, access to power. And what did you do with all of it? You used it to destroy someone who had nothing because she threatened your grip on something that was never yours to begin with. Jennifer's tears were falling freely now. Her makeup streaked her cheeks. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had walked through the front door 20 minutes ago. We were never together, Jennifer, Richard said quietly. I never asked you to be my girlfriend. I never gave you a ring. I never made you a promise. You built a fantasy around proximity and access and called it a relationship. And when reality didn't match the fantasy, you chose to burn everything down rather than face the truth. Jennifer's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Richard turned to Michael. And you? Michael looked up. His face was the color of old paper. You fired Kayla from Diamond and Grace because she showed kindness to a customer you deemed unworthy, Richard said. You've been stealing her commissions for months. You've been sabotaging her work since the day she stepped into Apex Legacy. And tonight, you helped your sister frame her for theft. Michael swallowed hard. Richard, I can explain. You're fired, Richard said. Effective immediately, your access to all Apex Legacy properties has been revoked, and the company's legal team will be in contact regarding the theft and fraud charges. Michael's face crumbled. Fraud charges? Richard, you can't. I can, Richard said. And I am. He turned back to Jennifer. The same applies to you. You're banned from all Apex Legacy properties. Your name will be removed from every guest list, every event, every contact database we maintain. And the necklace? That's grand theft. The police have already been notified. Jennifer shot to her feet. You wouldn't. Richard, my family, my reputation. If this gets out, it's already out. Richard said simply, Our legal team filed the report an hour ago. Jennifer staggered. She looked at Patricia, desperately searching for an ally. Patricia looked back at her, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then Patricia spoke. Her voice was measured and quiet, but it carried something it hadn't carried before. Shame. Oh, Kayla, an apology, Patricia said. Jennifer froze. I judged that girl before I knew her, Patricia continued. I listened to you, Jennifer. I believed your whispers. I let my own prejudice confirm what you were feeding me, and I was wrong. She paused. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She tore up my check, Patricia said softly, almost to herself. I offered her $5 million to walk away from my son, and she tore it up. She looked me in my eyes and said she wasn't for sale. Room was absolutely silent. Met a lot of women in my life, Patricia said. Society women, powerful women. Women with degrees and diamonds and family names that go back generations. Not one of them has ever passed a test like that. Not one. She looked at Richard. Your grandmother was right, she said quietly. She's been right about that girl from the beginning. Dorothy, who had been sitting in perfect stillness through all of this, watching, listening, holding space, finally spoke. I usually am, she said simply. And despite everything, despite the tension and the tears and the weight of the moment, Richard's mouth twitched, just barely. But it was there. The security officers stepped forward. Jennifer was escorted out. She screamed. She begged. She threatened. None of it mattered. The doors closed behind her and her voice faded into the November night. Michael was escorted out next. He went quietly. He didn't look at anyone. He walked through the foyer and out the front door and into the cold with nothing but the knowledge that everything he'd built on cruelty had been dismantled in a single evening. The sitting room was quiet. Richard stood by the fireplace. Dorothy sat in her chair. Patricia remained on the sofa. Donovan waited by the door. Find her, Dorothy said softly. Richard nodded. He was already reaching for his coat. I know, he said, and he walked out now, you might be wondering, did he send Donovan? Did he send a car? Did he call ahead? No. Richard Brown, a man who had a personal driver, an assistant, a security detail, and approximately 4 billion reasons to never do anything himself, got into his car alone and drove south through the city at 10:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. He drove past the gleaming towers of the Loop, past the restaurants and the theaters and the hotels, past the neighborhoods where the streetlights got dimmer and the sidewalks got emptier and the buildings got smaller. He drove until he reached the address Donovan had given him, Vanessa King's apartment building on the south side. A walk-up with a broken buzzer and a front door that didn't lock properly and a hallway that smelled like cooking oil and pine sol. He stood outside that building for 30 seconds. Richard Brown, in a cashmere coat that cost more than the building's monthly water bill, looking up at a third-floor window where a light was still on. He walked in. He climbed 3 flights of stairs. He knocked on apartment 3B. Vanessa opened the door. She was wearing pajama pants with little tacos on them, and a bonnet and an expression that went from confused to shocked to suspicious in approximately half a second. "Oh no," Vanessa said. "Oh no, no, no. You do not get to show up here at 11 at night looking like a whole GQ cover while my best friend is in there with puffy eyes and my apartment smells like oven heat. This is not fair. This is cosmically unfair." Richard blinked. "Is Kayla here? Are you here to hurt her? No. You here to accuse her of anything? No. You here to give her some speech about how it's complicated and you need space and maybe in another life things would be different? No. Then what are you here for, Richard Brown?" Richard looked at Vanessa. He took a breath, and for the first time in this entire story, his voice lost every trace of control, every layer of boardroom composure, every wall he had built to keep people out. "I'm here," he said quietly, "because she's the only person I want to talk to, and I should have said that a long time ago." Vanessa stared at him. She stared for a full 5 seconds, which for Vanessa was an extraordinary act of restraint. Then she stepped aside and pointed down the hallway. "She's in the bedroom, doors open. If you make her cry again, I will end you. And I mean that with every fiber of my 5'3" body. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Richard said. He walked down the hallway. The floor creaked under his shoes that had never touched a floor this old. He stopped at the doorway. Kayla was sitting on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were red. Her hair was pulled back. She was wearing a sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too big and had a faded college logo on the front. She looked tired. She looked hurt. She looked like a woman who had been knocked down so many times that getting up had become less of a choice and more of a reflex. She also looked, and Richard registered this with a clarity that surprised even him, like the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She looked up. Their eyes met. "Richard?" Her voice was raw, confused, guarded. "Jennifer took the necklace," he said. "I have the footage, every second of it. She planted it in your room. Michael helped. They've both been removed. Legal charges are being filed." Kayla stared at him. "You were right," Richard continued. "About everything, and I'm sorry." "You're sorry," Kayla repeated. Not with anger, with disbelief, like she was hearing a language she'd forgotten existed. "I should have stopped it sooner," Richard said. "I saw how Jennifer treated you. I saw how the staff talked. I saw the looks and the whispers. And I handled it, but I didn't handle it fast enough. I didn't protect you well enough. And tonight you walked out of my house believing that the people around me thought you were a thief. That's on me." Kayla's eyes filled with tears again. She blinked them back hard. "You drove here," she said softly. "Yes. Yourself. To a walk-up on the south side at 11 p.m. "Yes." "Why?" Richard took a step into the room, then another. He stopped in front of her, close enough to touch, close enough for her to see that his eyes, those controlled, measured, billionaire CEO eyes, were not controlled right now. They were open, vulnerable, afraid. "Because you're the only real thing in my life," he said. "Everyone else wants something from me, a deal, a connection, access, status. You're the only person who has ever looked at me and seen a man, not a bank account." Kayla's breath caught. "And because my grandmother told me something once," Richard continued. "She said that when you find someone who gives kindness without expecting anything back, you hold on to them. Because the world makes people like that once in a generation, and if you let them go, you spend the rest of your life knowing you lost the best thing that ever happened to you." His voice broke on the last word. "Just barely, just enough. Kayla," he said, "I'm in love with you." Room was so quiet that the only sound was Mr. Domings's telenovela Through the Wall, which had reached another dramatic moment, violins swelling, someone gasping in Spanish. "I'm in love with you," Richard repeated. "Not because my grandmother approves, not because you passed some test, not because of the optics or the story or anything the world would see. I'm in love with you because you are kind in a world that punishes kindness. Because you are honest in a world that rewards lies. Because you walked out of my house with your head held high when lesser people would have screamed and begged and fought. You just walked, with dignity, with grace, with those boots that make that sound. He glanced down at her feet. The boots were by the door. The left sole was still separating. I want to fix those boots, he said. And I want to stand beside you, and I want to spend the rest of my life earning the right to do both. From somewhere down the hallway, there was a very soft sound that might have been Vanessa whispering, "Oh my God," into her hands. But nobody acknowledged it. Kayla looked up at Richard. The tears she'd been holding back all night finally fell, but they weren't the same tears from before. These were different. These were warm. You drove to the south side, she whispered, in a cashmere coat, at 11 p.m. to tell me you love me. In Vanessa's apartment, while she's wearing taco pajamas. I didn't notice the pattern, Kayla laughed. It was a broken, wet, beautiful laugh, the kind that happens when joy and pain exist in the same breath. Love you too, she said. I've been trying not to, because loving someone like you when you're someone like me felt impossible. It felt like a setup for heartbreak. But I couldn't stop, because you stood up for me when nobody else did, because you actually saw me when the rest of the world looked right through me. Richard reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady, certain. Come home, he said. Not as a guest, not as an employee, come home as mine. Kayla looked at their hands, his and hers intertwined, his with the expensive watch, hers with the chipped nail polish, both holding on with the same strength. "'Kay," she whispered. "Okay." From the hallway, a very distinct sniffling sound emerged, followed by Vanessa's voice saying, "I'm not crying, it's allergies. I'm allergic to perfect moments." And despite everything, despite the weight of the night and the exhaustion and the emotional demolition of the last 12 hours, Kayla and Richard both laughed. 3 weeks later, Dorothy called a press conference. This was unusual. Dorothy Brown did not do press conferences. Dorothy Brown did not do press, period. She was a private woman who had raised a billionaire grandson without ever once seeking a camera or a headline. The fact that she had called the media to the Brown family estate sent shockwaves through Chicago society before she'd even said a word. Cameras lined the estate driveway. Reporters crowded the front lawn. Social media was already buzzing with speculation. Dorothy stepped out of the front door, dressed elegantly but simply, cream blouse, pearl earrings, her silver hair pinned back with quiet dignity. She walked to the podium that had been set up on the front steps. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the crowd, and she smiled. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'll keep this brief because at my age, standing in November air is a choice I don't make lightly." A few reporters laughed. "I'm here to set the record straight about my grandson and the woman the media has been talking about for weeks." She paused. "Kayla Brown is not a gold digger. She's not a social climber. She's not a con artist or a charity case or any of the other ugly things people have said about her online." Cameras clicked faster. "Kayla Brown," Dorothy continued, "is the woman who gave a stranger her last dollar. I know because I was that stranger. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know my name or my family or my address. She saw an old woman being humiliated, and instead of looking the other way, which, by the way, is what every other person in that room did, she walked over. She brought me water. She treated me like a human being. And when I left that store, she pressed her last $11 into my hand so I could get home safe." Dorothy's voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "I have lived 74 years, she said. I have met presidents and CEOs and royalty, and I'm telling you, standing right here with God as my witness, Kayla Brown is the finest person I have ever known." She reached to the side. Kayla stepped forward. She was wearing a simple navy dress, elegant but understated. No diamonds, no designer logos, just Kayla. She stood beside Dorothy, and Dorothy took her hand. "This," Dorothy said firmly, "is the woman I want my grandson to marry. And if the world has a problem with that, the world can take it up with me." Press erupted. Questions flew. Cameras exploded with flashes, but Dorothy was already done. She squeezed Kayla's hand, turned from the podium, and walked back into the house like a woman who had said exactly what she came to say and didn't need to add a single syllable more. The proposal happened 3 days later, not at a fancy restaurant, not at a gala, not in front of cameras or crowds. It happened in Dorothy's garden, the same garden where Kayla had sat alone staring at stars, wondering if she'd ever belong anywhere. Richard walked outside at sunset. The sky was orange and purple and ridiculous, the kind of sky that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood drama. Kayla was sitting on the bench. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "Home early," she said. "I canceled my afternoon," Richard said. "You canceled your—" Kayla looked at him. Richard Brown did not cancel afternoons. Richard Brown considered free time a theoretical concept. "Why?" Richard sat down beside her. He took her hand. He was quiet for a moment, not the calculated quiet of a CEO choosing his words, but the nervous quiet of a man who was about to do something he'd never done before and wasn't entirely sure his voice would cooperate. "Kayla," he said. "Yes. Built a lot of things. Buildings, companies, a reputation, a legacy." He paused. "But none of it means anything without someone to share it with. And I don't want to share it with just anyone. I want to share it with you." He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. And then Richard Brown, the man who commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals with absolute composure, got down on one knee in his grandmother's garden with slightly trembling hands. He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Not the biggest diamond Kayla had ever seen. She'd worked in a jewelry boutique, she'd seen them all. But it was the most beautiful, a round cut stone on a delicate gold band. Simple, elegant, perfect. "Kayla Monique Brown," Richard said, and his voice was steady now, steady and sure and full of something she'd never heard in it before. "Will you marry me?" Kayla looked at the ring. She looked at Richard. She looked at this man who had driven to the South Side in a cashmere coat, who had stood in Vanessa's hallway and said, "I love you," like he was handing her the key to every locked door inside him, who had seen her, truly seen her, when the whole world was looking the other way. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes." Richard slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Because of course it did. He stood. He pulled her into his arms. And he kissed her slowly, deeply, completely, in a garden full of dying flowers and living love, under a sky that had clearly been saving its best colors for exactly this moment. From the kitchen window, Dorothy watched them. She pressed her hand to her chest. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "Good things," she whispered to herself. "Good things come back to good people." The wedding was the event of the year. That's not an exaggeration. It was literally covered by every major outlet in the country. The guest list included politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and one very loud woman in a stunning emerald dress who kept telling everyone within earshot, "That's my best friend, my best friend. I was there from the beginning. Laundromat era, taco pajamas, I was there." Vanessa was, of course, the maid of honor. The ceremony was held at the estate in the same garden where Richard had proposed. Dorothy's decision. She said the flowers wouldn't bloom in November, but they'd have something better. They'd have love. Kayla walked down the aisle in a custom gown, simple, elegant, fitted. No tiara, no excessive jewels. Just her grandmother's pearl earrings, the only thing she'd kept from a childhood she rarely talked about. Richard stood at the altar. And when he saw her, something happened that Donovan later confirmed had never happened before in the entire time he'd known his boss. Richard Brown cried. Not dramatically, not with sound. Just 2 tears, one from each eye, rolling down his face as Kayla walked toward him. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Because some moments deserve to be felt completely. Dorothy, seated in the front row, reached over and squeezed Patricia's hand. Patricia squeezed back. And she was crying too. After the vows, which Richard had written himself, and which made Vanessa sob so loudly that the videographer had to adjust the audio, Dorothy rose from her seat. She walked to the altar carrying a small antique box. The room went quiet. "Kayla," she said, "I've been waiting a long time to give this to someone who deserved it." She opened the box. Inside was a brooch, gold, with 3 sapphires, clearly very old, clearly very precious. Not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented. "This belonged to my mother," Dorothy said. "And her mother before her. It goes to the woman who carries our family forward, not with money or power, but with grace." She pinned it to Kayla's gown. "Welcome to the family, baby," Dorothy whispered. Kayla hugged her. Long and tight and real. The kind of hug that says everything words can't. The reception was joyful, loud, and full of exactly the kind of chaotic energy that happens when Vanessa King is given a microphone and an open bar. But the most important moment happened quietly. Richard led Kayla to a corner of the ballroom. He reached into his jacket. The man had an endless supply of things in his jacket, apparently, and pulled out a folded document. "One more thing," he said. Kayla unfolded it. She read it once. She read it again. Her hands started shaking. It was the deed to Diamond and Grace Jewelry Boutique. "You bought it," she whispered. "I bought it," Richard confirmed. "It's yours, not mine, not Apex Legacy's, yours." Kayla stared at the document. She thought about the display cases she'd polished, the commissions she'd lost, the customers she'd been denied, the morning she'd walked in with a broken boot and a peanut butter sandwich, and the stubborn, foolish, beautiful belief that hard work and kindness would be enough. "I'm going to run it differently," she said, and her voice was fierce, fiercer than Richard had ever heard it. "Everyone who walks through those doors is going to be treated like they matter. Every employee is going to be paid fairly. No one is ever going to be turned away because of how they look." Richard smiled. "I know. I'm hearing Vanessa," I assumed. "She's going to be terrible at sales but incredible at everything else." "That tracks," Kayla laughed. Then she kissed him in the middle of the reception with 300 guests and a 12-piece band and Vanessa somewhere in the background yelling, "That's MY Best." Months after the wedding, Kayla stood in front of another crowd. This one was different. There were no designer gowns or champagne flutes, no media cameras or celebrity guests. The room was a community center on the south side of Chicago. The chairs were plastic. The coffee was from a machine. And the people sitting in those chairs, young men and women, some in work clothes, some in school clothes, some in the only clothes they owned, looked at Kayla with eyes that held a familiar combination of exhaustion and hope. It was the grand opening of the Kind Heart Foundation. Kayla's foundation, built from the ground up with Richard's support but Kayla's vision. The foundation provided job training, mentorship, interview preparation, and emergency financial assistance to young people in underserved communities. Its first class had 47 participants. By the end of the year, it would have 400. Kayla stepped to the microphone. She looked out at the faces before her. "I know what it's like to have nothing," she said. "I know what it's like to sit in a room and wonder if anyone even sees you. I know what it's like to give your best and have someone tell you it's not good enough. I know what it's like to be the person everybody counts out." She paused. "But I also know something else. I know that your situation is not your story. Where you are right now, broke, tired, scared, alone, that's a chapter. It's not the whole book. And the person who decides how the book ends, that's you." She smiled. "Always choose kindness. Even when it costs you. Even when nobody's watching. Even when the world tells you it's a waste of time. Because kindness is never wasted. It goes out into the world and it does things you can't predict and it comes back to you in ways you can't imagine." She looked down. On her left hand, her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light. On her lapel, Dorothy's brooch gleamed softly. In the front row, Richard sat watching her with quiet pride. Beside him, Dorothy dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. And beside Dorothy, Patricia, straight-backed, elegant, and genuinely smiling, nodded. "Someone told me once," Kayla said, "that good things come back to good people. I didn't believe it at the time. I was sitting in a laundromat with no money and no job and no idea what was going to happen next." She looked at the audience. Young faces, tired faces, hopeful faces. "But she was right," Kayla said softly. "She was right." Room erupted in applause. Kayla stepped back from the microphone. Richard met her at the side of the stage and wrapped his arm around her waist. "You were incredible," he murmured. "I was terrified," she whispered back. "Same thing," he said. She laughed. That broken, warm, beautiful laugh that he loved more than any sound in the world. They walked out together, into the afternoon sun, into the life they'd built, into a future that was imperfect and unpredictable and absolutely worth every struggle it had taken to reach it. And somewhere, in a warm study on the north side of Chicago, an old woman sat in her favorite armchair with a cup of tea and a satisfied smile. She had walked into a jewelry store in a worn coat and flat shoes. She had been mocked and dismissed and thrown out. And she had watched one girl, one brave, kind, stubborn girl, choose humanity over self-preservation. That girl was now a wife, a business owner, a philanthropist, a force. Dorothy took a sip of her tea. "Good things," she said to the quiet room, "come back to good people." And she meant it. Every word. So here's the thing about this story. It's not really about a billionaire. It's not about a mansion or a diamond ring or a fancy wedding. It's about a choice. A simple, daily, unglamorous choice to be kind. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you. Even when nobody sees it, because somebody always sees it. And the life you build when you lead with kindness. It might not look like Kayla's. You might not marry a billionaire or run a foundation or end up in the headlines. But the peace you carry, the respect you earn, the love you attract, that's worth more than every diamond in every vault in every boutique on every avenue in this country. Kindness is the rarest luxury in the world, and it doesn't cost a thing. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been counted out, someone who's tired of fighting, Someone who's sitting in their own laundromat right now, wondering if it's all worth it. Tell them Kayla's story. Tell them it's worth it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because stories like this, they don't just entertain. They remind us who we're supposed to be. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being the kind of person who stays until the end. I'll see you in the next one.